Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, good to see you.
Happy Monday, Dr. Paul. How are you?
Very well, thank you. And we're back to work again, sorting out all the problems of the world.
Of course.
Because we will take care of, that problem in D.C. I understand the government's not working too well.
We'll take over.
That's big news. The government's not working so well. But we want to talk about another area that we are concerned about, and that is in the area of foreign policy. In particular, what are we doing, in Syria these days, and what are the Turks doing? And a title of our program is "Whose side are we on anyway?" The Turks are fighting the Kurds. I understand the Turks are our friends. We've been working with them. They're allies. They're in NATO and all this kind of stuff. And the Kurds, we've tried to work with them and help them, but we're sort of on both sides of it now. I think the longer we're in this position, the more credibility we're losing. But this whole thing about Syria, it's not difficult for the left right now and the media to come down pretty hard on Trump for, not knowing exactly where he stands and the mess we have there, and it's all Trump's fault. But, it turns out that the involvement's been there for a long time because we've been involved everywhere for a long time. But the significant change in our interest in that area came under Obama. When Obama announced in 2011 Assad has to go, and we're for peace and we're for getting rid of ISIS, but we can't do anything until we get rid of Assad. And of course, subsequently, this has been back and forth, and Russia's been involved, and the war continues, and it looks like this could escalate even a lot more. But now what are we looking at? We're looking at the Turks bombing and threatening. They've sent troops now in to stop a buildup. Made up of our allies once again. But what happened recently that got our excitement going here, got their excitement that they felt so compelled to do this?
Well, yeah, over the weekend, Turkey did make good on its super big buildup on the border of Syria. It went into Syria to take on a group of Kurds in the Afrin area. And actually, we have a map. Maps are always helpful to try to figure this out, I think. But when we get the map up, we can see that. So the Turks are hitting the Afrin Kurds, that yellow area there on the left. The U.S. said, look, we don't have anything to do with these guys. Do what you will with them. But the Kurds on the right in Manbij and Kobane and everything, these are the ones that are explicitly backed by the U.S., also on the border with Turkey. So Turkey has moved in. It's got its Free Syrian Army troops on the ground, and it's hitting them from the air and from tanks. Moved in over the weekend, and there were a couple of triggers that led Turkey to do this. I mean, they didn't just wake up one morning and they've been pretty nervous about the U.S. backing the Kurds, but they didn't just wake up one morning and say, hey, it's time to hit Syria. A couple of things happened. About a week or so ago, the U.S. said, we're going to arm a 30,000-person border patrol made up of Kurds in Syria on the border with Turkey. You can imagine how that went over. Turkey's been fighting the Kurds forever. And also Tillerson announced that we're staying in Syria, we're building bases, we're staying in there, and our goal is to overthrow Assad, our goal is to back the Kurds, and to reduce the influence of Iran. So that just triggered Erdogan to go in. So we're behind it in a way.
Yeah, and it looks like the longer we stay there, the more credibility we lose, because we're supposed to be good friends of the Kurds and the Turks, but the Kurds haven't been doing so well lately. They seem to lose out.
Pick the wrong side.
And here they are in another situation where they may have to take a big step backwards. And of course, the Russians are involved, but they've moved their troops away from that. They're not looking for any fighting over there. But we have sent a lot of weaponry there and support for the Kurds and trying to build this army of 30,000. So in some ways, I hate anybody crossing borders, but in a way, I can understand why the Turks would be nervous about this, because, but back to our position as an independent country, it's very easy, I think, for us to know what to do and what we shouldn't have done and how we could have stayed out of it. But it doesn't look like there's much chance of that happening soon, because we would have had no part of this if we had anything to say about our policy. Not only would it have restrained Obama, it would have restrained everything that we've done since then. But of course, then there's also the group that's sort of behind the scenes, regardless of who is president, and that is who pulls the strings. Yeah. And but it still is bewildering, and maybe you have an answer to this. It's so bewildering to see so many failures on our part. If you look, especially in this century, 17, 18 years now of our incessant requirement to be over there, and anything from Afghanistan to Iraq to Libya to Syria, and it doesn't seem like we've gained anything. I mentioned that to you a little while ago, and I said, oh, I know what it is. The people who benefit, military, industrial complex, and maybe some people who are thinking about oil and pipelines, but something that is not out in the open on a routine basis.
Yeah, absolutely. And Turkish President Erdogan claimed that the Kurds have been provided with 2,000 plane loads and 5,000 truckloads of weapons. So somebody bought those on behalf of someone else, and someone took off pretty well with that. I think it's important that you mention the continuity of U.S. foreign policy, because the whole, according to a lot of media reports and press reports, the whole Assad must go thing was crafted, was architected, if that's a word, by Hillary Clinton. This was her thing in 2011. Assad must go. How ironic that so many people voted for Trump because he said, I'm not going to have Clinton's foreign policy. I'm not going to do this regime change. And here you have Tillerson, his Secretary of State, just this past week saying, oh, Assad must go.
There's lots of examples that we can use in details of this strategy going on with all these countries. But I want to read a quote from Moon of Alabama, because he just sort of sets the stage, and you think, how can it be any more chaotic, and how do we get ourselves into this mess? But it's sort of one sentence sort of demonstrates the whole mess that we have. He says, now, Turkish planes are taking off from the U.S.-built Incirlik air base to bomb the Kurds in the Syrian west, while the U.S. tanker planes take off from Incirlik to support the U.S. alliance with the Kurds in the east. How can anything be more schizophrenic like that? And no wonder there's no successes. And so I certainly don't see any successes. I think even a wonderful military success, which sometimes we claim, isn't necessarily a good success long term. But the other thing that we use, our government uses for being there and for having that 30,000 troop buildup is not legitimate. What they're saying is we're needed there to make sure, to take care of ISIS. We're fighting ISIS. And we've talked about this before. The United States government has not exactly been consistent in their so-called fight to get rid of ISIS. And ISIS has been on the ropes in this area. But I don't think the United States should claim a whole lot of credit for that.
No, especially in places like Raqqa when they let them go. But this quote really nails it on the head. This is a proxy war in Syria between the U.S. and its NATO ally. It's one of its more important NATO allies, Turkey. We're essentially fighting a proxy war with Turkey, and it's pretty amazing. But the other problem, is that people like Tillerson, people in the U.S. government, they start believing their own propaganda, and that's where policy goes off the rails. His speech in Stanford is a perfect example. He said, we are not going to do in Syria what Bush did in Iraq and just leave and let ISIS take over. That's a complete misread of what happened in history. There was a small force in Iraq, a very small force, U.S. force, when the U.S. finally was compelled to leave because the Iraqi government said, I'm sorry, we won't agree to your terms to stay, you've got to go. But that small force could not have prevented the rise of ISIS, could not have prevented what 180,000 U.S. troops could not prevent before that. So the whole idea of our pulling out of Iraq set the stage for ISIS is a total fallacy. What set the stage for ISIS and Al-Qaeda was the U.S. intervention in the first place in 2003. But they distort history.
You know, my argument that I've used frequently on this about not leaving is that of comparing Korea with South Vietnam. We left in disgrace and tail between our legs and left after so many people on our side died, 60,000, and then how many other people have we killed in that area? And we were told if we didn't go in and save Vietnam from communism, it would be a sweep of communism. We'd have communism forever. And we left there, and things turned out. And I always argued we won more victories in promoting and accepting peace there than what we accomplished in the war. All that fighting and killing accomplished nothing. And look at the perpetual presence that we've had in Korea, and now we can just, you know, get a little bit excited because we see that North Korea and South Koreans are allowed to come together and go to the Olympic Games. And this is after how many years? 50, 60 years this has been going on. So this idea that we can't walk away, there's no merit to this. The more we walk away and stay out of the internal affairs of these other nations, the better it is for them, the better it is for our military, the better it is for our national defense, the better it is for our budget. And we don't win that argument. So there's something wrong. Either they're very powerful and they never hear our voices, but I think the American people would buy into what we're talking about, and the whole problem is getting them to understand it and send a message to Washington. Enough is enough. That's how the Vietnam War stopped. The people rose up, and we need a little bit of that. And this is such an example of, you know, how much more of this are we going to do? And unfortunately, I think a lot of people are with us, and they would if they had the chance, but nobody's going to pay any attention till we're in such financial straits that we won't be able to afford to send all these weapons and pretend that we are the policemen of the world. Matter of fact, the image has been greatly diminished here in the last 4 or 5 years for our presence around the world.
And you know, there's a big crackdown on alternative media. You know, much of this whole Russiagate nonsense, Russia bots taking over the social media, it's simply a way to prevent alternative voices who are critical of U.S. foreign policy, you know, especially patriotic voices that don't want our country going down the tubes because of a foolish foreign policy, trying to prevent those voices from getting out by labeling them tools of foreign governments. But you know, there's the other thing. The U.S. claims it has to stay in Syria to prevent ISIS from rising again and all these things. But I think a real closer reason why the U.S. doesn't want to leave is evident in just today. Vice President Pence was speaking before the Israeli parliament, and he said, we will never certify that Iran is following the nuclear deal again. You know, so this is the U.S. doing the bidding of both Israel and Saudi Arabia in targeting Iran. I think the U.S. has an idea that it can stay there and keep its bases in Syria and put pressure on Iran. It's once again a massive miscalculation. It's going to head for a disaster.
No, Iran's involved. We don't talk about it a whole lot, and the media doesn't talk about Iran being involved, you know, in Syria that much. But how much are they really involved? Do they send advisors or send money, send weapons? And do they identify with the Russian policy? Or where do you think they stand on their position?
They sent militias in. Those militias did a lot of fighting, and they fought ISIS because ISIS is a mortal enemy of Iran. ISIS is a radical Sunni army that's radically anti-Shia. So Iran did a lot on the ground to fight ISIS. We should actually be thanking them and then trading with them rather than trying to target them.
They were doing some of our work.
Yeah, doing some of our work.
And we took the credit.
Saving us some money, too.
Yeah.
But I guess in closing, I would just mention something we both watched on Colonel Pat Lang's website. Remember, Colonel Lang spoke at one of your lunches, and his site is always very provocative. But here's how he sees it playing out. Okay, the Afrin Kurds have been hit hard by the Turks. And then the Rojava Kurds to the east are going to see what happened, the bloodied Afrin. And here's what he thinks is going to happen. The Russians, first of all, admonishing these Afrin Kurds, or these Rojava Kurds for siding with the U.S. Look what happened to your other Kurds here. The Kurds are going to realize it was a bad choice to go with the U.S. and will appeal to Russia for protection. Moscow will tell Turkey to back off and provide face-saving way to do so. The Syrian army will resume control of that border area, and in turn the Kurds will get some kind of local autonomy. It sounds like a pretty good outcome, and I don't know if that's exactly what happens, But that's what he predicts. It's pretty interesting.
Yeah, it sure is, and I guess there's a chance for a lot of unintended consequences. And I think that one country that may come out looking pretty good on this is if Russia comes in and sort of brings people together and peace comes about in spite of what we're doing. Russia is going to gain internationally, but that's also the reason that we don't like competitors. That's why we are going to be contesting any increase of influence that the Russians have, even if it's in their backyard. The same way with the Iranians. The Iranians are never going to get the credit, and our government has already announced next go around we're not going to certify them, despite the fact that the inspectors go in and they say they have followed all the rules. And I just don't know how we're able to keep getting away with that, because most of the world knows about that, but most of the world aren't quite in the position where they are just going to defy us. But I think it's going to happen more and more. It's going to happen more in foreign policy and in that strategic area, as well as financial, because I think they're disgusted with us being the kingpin and getting a free ride by getting to print the world's reserve currency. And that will make a difference, and I think that's where we see some changes. China is itching at the bit. They won't happen overnight, but it'll be a gradual change, and they are setting the stage for this because they have money in the bank and they have gold in the bank, and we don't. So things are shifting. So whether it's this year or next, I think there will be a continual move in that direction, which will eventually bring down the American empire. The American empire cannot be financed under those conditions. And when I see things like this happening, it's not just the two of us sitting here talking about it. There's a lot of people around the world who are saying, yeah, it's exactly what's going on. But you will not see this on American television. I do want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report, and please come back soon.